brings for your cycling, and also what its benefit is. We'll be talking a bit about how you fuel differently on different training days. So how you fuel differently on a rest day compared to a race day. We won't be talking too much about ride nutrition because next week we've got a guest speaker in, Ben Price. He is the Sedal Quickstep nutritionist, and he'll be talking a bit more about the racing side of things. So race fueling, what you should eat on race day, what you should eat when you're out on a ride. But for today, we're just going to talk about the basics. So I'm just going to share my screen with you all. And if you have any questions, please feel free to just pop them in the chat, and we'll stop halfway to answer those questions. And then we'll stop at the end if you've got any more questions. You can ask them then. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. There we go. So can we all see that? Perfect. So we're going to talk about nutrition. So why is nutrition important? So it's to get the best out of your body. If you're not fueling your body properly, then you won't be able to use your muscles full capacity, and that means you'll be limiting the power you're able to put out on a bike, and therefore you'll be limiting your performance. Also, it's really important to ensure long-term health. We're not going to be cyclists forever. We might ride bikes forever, but we're not going to be competitive cyclists forever. So we want to make sure that throughout our whole life that we stay healthy. Because if you don't manage your diet properly, then you won't be able to carry on without long-term health issues. Also, to ensure you have enough energy for training. If you don't eat properly, you end up going into a bit of a cycle of you're not fueling and eating enough for your training. So then you're not recovering properly after your training. And each session you're going to perform worse. So if you had, let's say, a 3-day training block and you started the first day and weren't eating enough, then you have less energy available for the second day, and then you have even less energy available for the third day. Whereas if you're fueling properly, that drop-off is a lot less. So you tend to maintain your starting energy at the start of each session. It will drop a little bit because obviously you'll be fatigued, but the actual energy availability will be the same. To ensure good recovery, again, if you don't recover properly after a session, you'll feel it the next day and the day after, and it will just impair your training going forwards. And also to prevent overtraining and chronic fatigue. So this is chronic fatigue. It's just basically when you ride a lot or you put a lot of stress on your body, but you don't give yourself enough time to recover. And if you're not fueling properly, even if you give yourself the time to recover, you might not be able to recover because you're not giving yourself your body the nutrients to go through that recovery process. So first of all, we're going to talk about our food groups. So we've got 4 main food groups here: carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins and minerals, and we'll also talk a bit about water, so hydration. So obviously, I presume you've all heard of these before, but we're just going to go into a bit of detail about what each of them are and how they benefit us and why we need them. So first of all, we've got our carbohydrates. So they're your main source of energy. Carbohydrates come in many different types. So you've got the slow release carbohydrates, and these are complex. So these are your things like bread, wheat, pasta, things that take a long time to digest. So they are good carbohydrates and they'll last a long time, but they do take a long time to digest. And fast release and simple carbohydrates are your sugars, so they're like chocolate, sweets, anything that you have, like for example in your bottles. If you have energy powder in your bottles, that will be a simple carb, just because it then gets into your system a lot quicker and you can use that energy a lot more quickly. So when do we want to have a slow release carb? Well, slow release carbs you want to have like the day before or a couple of days before your race. You want to start carb loading, which is basically where you increase your carbohydrate content. So you start eating more carbohydrate rich foods, so more pasta, more potato. You can use potatoes. Potatoes often get forgotten about, but anything like that, just so that you have that energy source stored So when you come to the race, you've got that to use as well as what you're taking in during the race. Fast release simple carbs, again, they're more used like your energy gels before a race or during your race. And that's more when you'd want to see those simple carbs, because they're not necessarily the best for your overall health, but they do give you a lot of energy for those race efforts or those ride efforts. Whereas the slow release carbohydrates, they're really good for everyday consumption, and they're really good for general health. So they can consist of also fruits and vegetables. So they're usually they're very high in sugar, but it's a good sugar rather than it being what we call a bad sugar, which would be like what you find in chocolate and things like that. Fruits are very good sugars, and they're also really important for getting your vitamins and minerals, which we'll talk about a bit later. So next we're going to move on to protein. So protein is something that gets talked about a lot in cycling and any sport really, because of its importance in recovery. So its main function of protein is to help rebuild muscles. But the commonly forgotten thing is that it's not necessarily the most protein you can get will help your muscles rebuild quicker, because protein can only be digested and function well in 20 gram servings. So if you see all these big products that shout about how it's got 25-30 grams of protein, you're probably not using half of that, and it's probably just going straight through you and coming out the other side. So you're wasting a lot of protein just because you don't need that much and your body can't take on that much. So it's really important that if you are taking or having protein, you have that 20 grams, and then if you want some more protein, you have to wait and have it a bit later. So for example, if you got back from a ride, you could have a protein shake and then wait a couple of hours and then have your dinner, and then you'd be able to digest it. But if you had like a protein shake and then your dinner straight away with 20 grams of protein, for example, 20 grams of protein within a chicken, then you didn't really need to have the protein shake. So what I'm trying to say is, if after a ride, after a race, you can get a meal in you really quickly, you don't need the protein shake. The protein shakes are really good for if you're out at a race and you can't get that meal in within the 30 minutes after your race or hour after your race. But if you can, for example, if you're at home and you can have your dinner straight away after, within the hour period after your ride, then that will be just as good as getting that protein shake. And it's a better form of protein. It's more digestible and it's more naturally occurring. So if you can do a meal over having a protein shake, it is probably better for you. Also, there's a lot of research gone into overnight protein. So your body can digest protein overnight and it can help with your recovery. So a lot of people have a protein shake before they go to bed, but this is slightly different. So we're going to talk about protein types. So there's whey protein and there's casein. So whey protein is more the sort of protein that you'd have after a race, because you want to get it in to you really quickly, and it needs to react really quickly because you've obviously just damaged your muscles when you're doing your training, so it needs to repair those quickly. Whereas casein is a bit more slow acting. So that is ideal if you wanted to have a protein shake before you go to bed, so that you can carry on that recovery overnight while you're under low load. It's really good to use in an evening. Again, protein can be found in fish, meats, milk, yogurt, anything that's mainly an animal product. If you're a vegetarian, obviously this isn't as easy to get protein in, but you can get it in nuts, you can get it in tofu and things like that, and there's all other sources of protein, like beans, for example, that you can get your protein from, but you just have to be a bit more not cautious, but you have to be a bit more aware of your protein intake if you are a vegetarian. Fats. So fats, everyone always thinks that fats are really bad for you, but we do need them because fats are used to help absorb vitamins and minerals, and they also are really good for your heart and your brain health because your brain is made predominantly of fat. So we do need fats in our diet, otherwise we will really struggle. And they can also be used as a store of energy. So if you're doing low intensity riding, you can also use your fats to provide you even more energy. So, for example, in those long endurance rides that you do in the winter, you'll be using a mix of fats and carbohydrates to fuel your ride. So saturated fats are animal fats, and they are known as the bad fats. So that's why you see, like, for example, in meats, people tend to go for the leaner meats because they're low fat. Unsaturated fats are really good fats, so they're in nuts. You can find them in avocados, oils, and things like that, but not coconut oil. But things like olive oil that are actually good for your body. And then trans fats are the fats that you hear about that really aren't very good for you. They're usually more man-made, so you'll find them in fast food, you'll find them in chocolate, all those things that you associate when you think about fats. That's where you find the trans fats, which are not so good for you. So we're moving on now to vitamins. And vitamins, these are your vitamins. And vitamins help with all sorts of things, and they can be found in such a wide variety of foods. This is why it's really important that you have a balanced diet, because you need to be able to have all those components to allow you to get all these different vitamins. For example, vitamin A, which is for vision and skin health, that can be found in milks, cheeses, things like that. Vitamin B is for carbohydrates to convert them to energy. So this is in meats and fish predominantly, but it can also be found in like fish oils and things like that. Vitamin C, that's used for growth and repair. That's your citrus fruits mainly, and that's where you get those sort of vitamins from. Vitamin D, everyone's heard about vitamin D, and it is really, really important. You get it mainly from the sun, but you can also get it in some foods. But if you ever have the chance or ever need any supplementation, it will be in vitamin D, especially in this country because the weather's not very good most of the time. But that's really important for absorbing calcium, which we'll talk about a bit later. Vitamin E is for growth and development of bones and muscles, and that's found in wheats and grains and things like that. And then vitamin K is for blood clotting. So if you cut yourself, vitamin K is what's used to help form a scab and stop that bleeding. And that's found in like leafy vegetables and things like that. And then we're moving on to minerals. Again, these all help with, generally, they all help with cell function. So any interactions within your cells in your body, they need these minerals to be able to form those chemical reactions. So potassium is commonly associated with bananas, but any fruit and veg really, and that's for nerve, heart and muscle function. So that's just your generic bodily function really. Same with magnesium, and that can be found in things like nuts. Most of these are found in meats and in like dairy products and animal products. So calcium again, bone health. You always remember the adverts. I don't know whether you guys do, but the yogurt adverts where they say about calcium making your bones grow stronger. Sodium is for your water balance, and that's salt. So anything that you can think of that's like a salty meat. So fish is a really good example. That's where you get your sodium from. Phosphorus is part of ATP, which is basically your unit of energy or how you make energy. So it's really important for energy production that you have that phosphorus in your body, and that's again found in wheats and grains. Iron is a really big one, especially for women. So this is really important for red blood cell production, and also to help with transport of oxygen around the body because of those red blood cells, and that's mainly found in red meat. And then you've got zinc, which works with all of the vitamins and also some enzymes to help with those bodily functions happening, and that's again found in a lot of fish. So we're now moving on to hydration and water. So over 70% of our body is water, so water is really important. And even a slight drop in hydration can really, really reduce your performance, and also how you can deal with, for example, temperature and extreme weather conditions. So it's really important that you make sure you're hydrated. It also is really key because water is one of the main things that helps any of the reactions that go on in your body. And without hydration, without adequate hydration, you can't process your food properly. So no matter how much of the correct fuel you're putting in your body for food-wise, if you're not drinking enough, you won't be able to digest half of the stuff that you're putting in your body. So the efficiency of what you're taking in isn't very good. So, for example, if you had a energy bar, for example, but then didn't have any water, you wouldn't take on the full contents of that energy bar. So this is why hydration is really important. So you should have 2 to 3 litres of water a day. And usually this translates on a bike to about a bottle an hour. But hydration can vary dependent on the person. And then it's also really important that you think about hydrating before an event. So it's no good turning up at an event and thinking, right, I've got to have a bottle an hour when you're on your bike, but you've not drunk enough the day before or the morning leading up to it. It's really important that hydration is consistent. And the same goes for when you're training. You need to make sure that hydration is taught throughout the training. So when you go into a race, you're not all of a sudden trying to drink a bottle of water an hour, and it's really, really hard. You need to ingrain that into your training and everything else. But the main function of water is to help with that cell function and maintaining your body temperature. So do we have any questions? I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then I will come back to you guys and see if you've got any questions for me. Any questions in the chat? Any questions on anything I've spoken to you guys about at all? It can be any part of it. It can be about the carbohydrates. It can be about certain food groups. It can be about when you should be having these food groups. It can be about anything at all to do with these sort of nutritional aspects. After we've done this, we'll talk through a bit about how your diet changes dependent on what training loads you've got. So that'll be quite interesting. I can see Ben and Hugh are typing. So we've definitely got some questions coming. If anybody else has any questions, feel free. So Hugh, you've heard somebody talking about bicarbonate. So I'm not going to talk about supplementation tonight. It is something that can be used in racing, but it's usually something that kind of comes in a bit later. So that'll be more seen in your adult career. Ben, who's coming on next week, will talk to you a bit about supplementation, but he agrees in the sense that until you're older, supplementation isn't necessarily something that you want to be trying, because it's the sort of thing that you need to boost your performance by a little margin rather than for it to help while you're progressing, if that makes sense. So online it recommends 30 to 50 grams to build muscle. How come this is different to what you recommend? So 30 to 50 grams of protein will build muscle. That is correct. But you'd have to take it in different doses. So rather than doing like 50 grams at once, you take your 20 to 30 grams, for example, and then you have a gap. So, for example, you finish your ride at just after lunchtime, you have your protein of 20 to 30 grams, and then you have another 20 to 30 grams at dinner. So it could be 50 grams, but that's within a day rather than in one sitting, if that makes sense. Christine's just said, should you carb load on the day of the race? So on the day of the race, you should have done most of your carb loading. So you'll have carb loaded coming into the race. And then on the day of the race, usually it'll be a morning, so you won't have a massive amount of time to carb load anyway. So on the day, if it's a morning start, you probably will want quite a big breakfast. Good things for breakfast on race day: porridge, because it lasts for a long time. But also, if you can't stomach something so heavy, cornflakes are really good. It's a really strange one, but because they are so high in sugar, and also they don't feel very filling, so you can eat a lot more. Whereas obviously porridge feels really filling. So if you eat like a little bit of it and feel really full, whereas at least with cornflakes you can get a bit more of that carbohydrate in. So that's for a morning start. For an afternoon start, yes, you can have a high carbohydrate content. So you can have some like pasta, for example, before your race, but you don't want to be having massively high quantities because otherwise it might not sit properly during the race. We've got another one from Ollie. I take a multivitamin daily to ensure I get what I need. Is this worthwhile if I don't eat much fruit? Yes, that is worthwhile. If you can't get vitamins for whatever reason, for example, I know iron's quite a hard one to get if you're a vegetarian, and because there aren't really much, there isn't much iron in many vegetables. There's spinach, but there's not a massive iron content. So things like that, if you're not able to get it in your diet, having vitamin supplementation is great, but ideally you should get it from the natural sources. But again, it just depends on whether you have those available. But if you can eat more fruit, for example, I would recommend that over the vitamin tablet. But it's all personal preference, I suppose, at the end of the day. So thanks for all those questions. And now we're just going to move on to just the last few bits. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to talk about racing, or how your nutrition changes dependent on your training load and your racing. So we'll just put this back on screen. So how does fueling differ based on load? So this is a diagram to show how your food consumption should be on an easy day. So on an easy day, you should have a lot of vegetables because that's where you get all your vitamins and minerals. And because you're not training so hard, you don't have that need for the carbohydrates to fuel and give you the energy. So you can have more of your carbohydrates from vegetables than wheats and grains, so pasta, rice, potatoes, and things like that. So half of your diet on an easy day should be those vegetables and fruits, because that's the best time to get them in. A quarter of your diet on those days should be so protein. So that can be soy protein, nuts, beans, meat, fish, anything like that. And that's because you still need to have that protein, even if you're not necessarily recovering, you still need that protein in your diet to make it a well-rounded diet. And then moving on to a moderate training day. So this is not a really, really hard training day, but just something where you're going out and you are putting your body under some stress, but it's not like the end of the world, the worst turbo session ever, or a race. So you'll see here, there's a little bit less vegetables and a little bit more of the starchy foods. So that's pasta, rice, bread, potatoes, things like that, because they will be the slow release energy forms that you'll be able to consume and use throughout that training session. You also see that there's a little bit on the top right that says about fresh fruit now, and making sure that you have that fruit as well as the vegetables is a really good way to get the vitamins in. And also you can still get quite a bit of energy from fruits, especially like things like bananas. So they're really good sort of training snacks. And then you see that the protein is still the same. The protein will remain the same whether you're training more or less, because that protein is a core part of your diet. And you will see that it is mainly the carbohydrates and the vegetables that change proportions. Then for a hard training day, it's completely the reverse of the easy training day. So half of your diet should be pasta. So this is the carb loading that we're talking about. So pasta, rice, all of these grains and cereals are the main bulk of your diet on a hard day, just so that you can get that training done. Then you've got some vegetables still in there, just to keep those vitamins and minerals topped up, but they're on a much smaller scale than they were on a moderate or an easy training day. You've still got those fruits as snacks, just to make sure that you're still getting those vitamins and also providing an extra source of carbohydrate. And then your lean protein, again, has stayed the same. So you're still getting all the protein in that you need to be able to recover and function properly. So do we have any questions just on how it differs or why it differs? Thanks for joining. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and just take any questions on training days and how they differ. It could be on anything now. If there's something that I've not mentioned other than ride nutrition, you can ask a question on that. If there's anything else, I can see Dan and Ben are typing about why you need more protein on one day, or why you need more vegetables on a rest day and things like that. Please feel free to ask. Who's going to be first? I can see quite a few people typing, so that's really good to see. I've got Ben. Is caffeine important? Should I take it in training and racing, or just racing? So caffeine is something, again, it's a bit more supplementation, so it's not necessary, but it can be seen to improve performance. So it's something that I would personally only really use to gain that edge on race day. I wouldn't use it in training, just because there's not really any need for it. And there is actually no real studies that say that the more caffeine that you take helps. It's more there's more saying that if you take a lot of caffeine, it might dull your reception to caffeine. So if you reserve it for race days, it should have a better effect on you. But again, caffeine is a massive minefield of stuff. It is probably the best supplement to use in terms of it's easy to manage, but you really have to make sure you check your dosage, because if I personally was using caffeine, I would just have a caffeine gel. I wouldn't have all my gels as caffeine gels, because it's just too much for your body. And then you can end up compromising your own racing, because you're taking in so much caffeine that it inhibits you rather than actually helping. And a side effect of caffeine is that it does impair your focus. So if you have too much, you might lose focus, and it's not ideal in obviously a bunch racing scenario. So caffeine is good, but use it with caution. We've got one from Dan. If you're eating something unhealthy, is it best to eat it while you're doing an activity? So when you're racing and training, obviously a classic training snack is like something like jelly babies, or like a jam sandwich, or something that's really high in sugar. So it is good to eat it during training. And also, if you do want something unhealthy, because obviously we all want to eat unhealthy sometimes, it's really good to do it after a session, because your body has used so much carbohydrate that it's basically like a furnace. So everything that it can get straight after exercise, it will just burn up and replace the carbs. So if you are going to have something unhealthy, it'd probably be better to just do it straight after you've done your activity. So that's why you see people like after a race having a chocolate bar or a can of Coke, because it just literally trying to get that sugar back in you as quickly as possible. So if you're going to eat something unhealthy, probably do it after a race or a really hard training session. And then last one from Ollie. How many bars per hour when training? So this can completely vary dependent on weight. It can vary dependent on your own personal carbohydrate tolerance. So a lot of people say you want like 60 grams of carbs an hour, but that is a lot of carbs. Some people have even more than that, and it's a lot of carbohydrate for your body to process. So it all depends on what you've been used to and where your body sits with that. Some people can just eat a lot of carbohydrate and be fine. Other people really struggle. So it's something that you need to build up and work your way up. You can't just say, oh, well, this is how much you want. This is how much the pros are having. So therefore, that's what you need. Because if your body can't process it, you're just wasting it and it's not working for you. Ben will go into a bit more detail again next week on what he suggests you eat on rides and how much of everything to eat and why that is and how it varies. But yeah, I think I hope that answers your question, Ollie. So if that's all the questions, thank you for joining us tonight. And the key take home is hydration is key. Making sure that you have that water allows you to make use of all the carbohydrates that you have taken in. Protein, making sure you get it in as soon as possible after your ride. 20 gram servings, and making sure you get a balanced diet and keeping protein, fats, and carbohydrates all incorporated in that whole diet. So thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you all again next week.